Hey guys, I just wanted to take a few minutes and explain a little bit about the control system in Heliborne, because there seems to be some confusion. It comes up every now and then on some of the different forums that I frequent about people not really understanding the controls in Heliborne, and particularly how the controls are coupled in simple flight mode, which leads to confusion on why the game controls the way it does, or results in helicopters not acting the way people expect them to act. So the first thing about Heliborne's control scheme, and I mentioned this in one of my other videos, is the flight model is semi-arcade. Or simucade, I guess is another term for it. And what that means is, well, it's not a fully arcade flight model, but it's not a full-on sim either. So it has elements of both. In Heliborne, this comes across as it's got limited movement on the helicopters, like their yaw, or sorry, their bank angles limited, and things like that. And the controls react a little more like kind of in reduced or simplified physics, but they still act realistically. So some people jumping into this game expecting an arcade flight model, it really takes them by surprise, and they don't really understand how or why things are acting the way they are, and it confuses them, particularly in simple flight mode. So for the first part of this video, I want to talk about actually how a helicopter flies. 'Cause there seems to be a bit of confusion around that, and I think that's the first part where a lot of the confusion starts. So the one thing you have to realize about a helicopter is the rotor disc is a wing, and it functions very much like a wing on a natural airplane. So, for example, the main roll control on a helicopter, instead of your stick that controls pitch and roll, you have a collective, or sorry, a cyclic. Collective's the other. You have a cyclic, and that's basically short for cyclical rotor pitch. And what the cyclic does is it changes the pitch of the rotor blades depending on where they are in the rotor disc. So for example, if I were to go and roll to the left, what that would do on a real helicopter is it would decrease the rotor pitch on the left side of the rotor disc and increase it on the right-hand side of the rotor disc. And that will produce a roll to the left because I'm decreasing lift on the left side and increasing lift on the right side. Basically exactly what you do with ailerons on a wing. So if I do that here, you're going to see the chopper is going to drift to the left, and it's going to roll to the left a little. And it's rolling to the left because just like the wing on an airplane, as soon as you bank, you're putting a horizontal movement in there. Or sorry, a horizontal force, which results on horizontal movements. So you get the same thing if I move the cyclic to the right and back to the left. It rolls helicopter, same way it would an airplane. All right. Now, this is the exact same thing with pitch. If you move the cyclic forward, you are increasing the rotor pitch on the rear of the rotor disc and decreasing it on the front. This is going to create more lift on the rear of the rotor disc and less lift on the front of the rotor disc, resulting in the helicopter pitching forward. And just like when we saw with roll, when on the downgoing side of the rotor disc, you get an opposite horizontal force. And guess what? That's the exact same thing that happens when you pitch. So if we pitch downward, we get an opposite horizontal force, which pushes the helicopter forward. And same thing when you pitch upward. Now, of course, it actually goes up because our horizontal movement in that direction. So again, if we go to the side, we get the horizontal movement left and right. And if you pitch forward, you get a horizontal movement forward and a horizontal movement backwards. The reason it's important to understand this, now I'm also in advanced control mode here, just because I want to demonstrate to you the individual axes. But the reason it's important to understand this is because it really changes how the helicopter flies when it's moving at speed. When it's hovering, it reacts basically as you would expect it. Moving the stick to the left, the helicopter translates left. Moving the stick to the right, it translates right. And yaw, which I have on my pedals, controls the tail rotor, which of course produces a nose swing to the left or a nose swing to the right. Now, when a helicopter is moving at speed, if you remember what I just said earlier, moving the cyclic is effectively the same thing as moving a stick for the ailerons on a wing. So when you're moving at speed and you bank in a helicopter, it's going to react like an airplane. And it's going to bank and turn to the left if I move the cyclic to the left, and it's going to bank and turn to the right when I move the cyclic to the right. Now you'll notice here, I'm not getting really much drift over the ground. And again, just because you will in simple control mode, but I'm advanced. The helicopter's very more or less following the natural arc of the curve. It's drifting a bit because it's a really maneuverable helicopter, but you're not getting much ground drift. So this would be very similar to doing a coordinated turn in an airplane. You're going to get largely the same kind of result. All right, now, what happens if I add yaw into that, where I'm forcing the nose around? You get a much sharper turn where the helicopter swings. Now, in theory, if you're moving forward, you can also do a complete flat turn. This is one of the nifty places where the arcade flight model comes into play. But you still get drift. So if I combine them, again, I get a large amount of drift over the ground, whereas if I just use roll, let's get some speed back up here, I get that much more airplane-like flight behavior, because my rotor disc is once again just basically acting as a wing that I'm banking. So knowing that, I think this is where this starts to confuse people with the simple flight controls in this game. So I'm just going to hop back here into simple flight controls. Where's that? Settings, controls. Let's go over to simple. All right, so simple flight controls, what's going to happen is your helicopter is going to try and point the nose wherever you're pointing your mouse. So this is for the most part, it's pretty intuitive, look where you want to go kind of control scheme. And you can do kind of the same things. You can, if you pitch down, it's the same thing on the stick as pushing the cyclic forward, you're going to speed up. If you pitch backwards, you're going to slow down. But here's where it really starts to differ. When you yaw on a mouse control, move the mouse left and right, you are actually combining both yaw and roll. All right, so if I go back to my advanced controls and I do that kind of maneuver, it's you don't get quite the same result on a stick, but it's much closer to, advanced controls, but it's much closer to what you'll get with a mouse. So because you are combining both yaw and roll in a coupled movement, or a coupled axes on simple controls, what happens is when you're turning, you're going to get that drift that you did not get with just roll on the stick. And I think this is one of the things that kind of throws a lot of people off in this game, because when they move the mouse over, they're not expecting the helicopter to do that kind of drift. They're either expecting it to turn as they might expect a helicopter to turn in more arcade games, which would be more akin to your kind of, oh yeah, you want to go this way, so we'll point this way. Or they're expecting it, actually beyond that, I really don't know, because I haven't really played a lot of arcade helicopter games. Depending on how you have your keyboard set up, I've messed with mine. You can produce, so this here is what happens when you just use roll on mouse controls. You can do this on advanced, but you have to actually combine roll and yaw, which is exactly what simple controls is doing here. It's using yaw to keep the nose pointed where your mouse cursor is pointing automatically. So I'm going to do one more video where I just kind of explain my HOTUS controls and how I've set them up using my CH HOTUS and Heliborne. Because I had a couple of questions on that. If you have any questions about this, or I know this video probably wasn't quite as clear as I wanted it to be, I kind of did off the top of my head. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to explain it as best I can.